Okay, I think we're live, so this should be okay. Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're based, right? At the time of the recording, when this will be broadcasted, it will be evening where I'm located in Brussels. Today, we're hosting a session on Heygrowth Summit on the Marketing Analytics Day, and the topic will be helping brands build better digital products. Lesson learned from the trenches, from the field, actually. So let's start with a short introduction. Let me check if I can switch the slide. Yeah. So my name is Glenn van der Linde. I'm a co-founder and lead solution architect at Human 37. We are a customer data strategy agency / practice. And our mission is to build a world where people or customers get the best experiences from brands. How do we do that? We do that by helping them build their customer data infrastructure. And that customer data infrastructure is built around data collection, not only on customer data, but also on marketing data, product analytics data, all of these things. We'll come back to that later. And also enabling these clients and through these infrastructures to help them deliver the experiences that they want to deliver to their customers, right? Now, today's talk is actually a bit of a practical session, in the sense that what we're going to do is, obviously, as we're an agency or a consulting practice, we work with a lot of brands and a lot of customers around the world that try to deliver a lot of experiences to clients, and most of these experiences are data driven. And so our objective today is actually to share a couple of experiences that we've had working with brands, with companies that try to achieve this, share a couple of pitfalls that we've encountered, and share a couple of tips, right? Because what we've observed is that, like, almost any company these days has data, but very few companies are actually able to deliver insights or derive insights from that. And almost no company, actually, if you're very honest, is able to turn that data into actual better experiences. And so that's the job that we're trying to help them with. And that's also the experiences we want to share with you today. Now, you might have noticed that my previous slide actually said behavioral data. I know it's a marketing analytics day today, but we interpret behavioral data in a very broad way, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Let me first go through the definition that I got this from Wikipedia, what behavioral analytics actually is. Behavioral analytics is a recent advancement in business analytics that reveals new insights into the behavior of customers on e-commerce platforms, online games, web and mobile applications, and the Internet of Things. Basically, broadly speaking, it's any data point that you capture where there is a customer interaction, right? When you call it marketing analytics, it's usually in the context of how do we optimize campaigns, how do people find our assets? And when we say digital products and assets, to clarify that, we actually mean websites, applications, any digital touch point that a brand has with the customer. But usually when you talk marketing analytics, it's about acquisition, attribution, all of these things. Then we have product analytics, which is defined like how do people engage on a very deeply or granular level with products and websites. And then you have customer analytics, where customer analytics is really into the field of who are my customers, what are the segments they belong to, what are the attributes that we can paste on top of users, and what are the actions individual users take, right? Today, we're just going to talk about a broad field, behavioral data, and we're going to narrow it down, or like simplify it actually, to event-based analytics. Why do we do that? I mentioned a couple of things. I mentioned marketing analytics, product analytics, customer data analytics. Now, most of these tools or these methodologies that you'll be applying in these specific fields, they are starting to evolve in something called event-based analytics. And event-based analytics is the fact that you're just simply tracking an event and attaching a couple of properties, attributes, or parameters or traits, depending on which toolkit or field you're in. You'll be attaching that on top of these events, right? To come back to that, there's actually an advancement that you probably all are familiar with. Universal Analytics moving to GA4 is clearly marketing analytics. They're moving into event-based tracking, where product analytics such as Amplitude and Mixpanel are already event-based. And if you think of customer data collection platforms like mParticle or Segment, they're also event-based, right? If you want to talk about the difference between all of these fields, that's not the topic of today, but come find me in the Heygrowth Slack. There's a bunch of resources that we can share. But why are we talking about event-based analytics and the lessons that we have there? Simply because the future of measurement for applications, website, and whatever interaction you have is built around event-based analytics. And it's going to be your basis to start building better experiences, right? It's going to be the basis for your data collection layer going forward. Now, I mentioned that we're going to share some experiences and we're going to drill them down, or like try to share them in the form of, like, let's say 5 tips, right? First tip is behavioral data needs to be part of a process. What does that actually mean? Everybody agrees, or most people agree, that we live in a service economy. We've been through the pandemic. Everything is service economy. Everything is actually experience economy more. And so if you simplify or dumb that down, it's actually like if we build the best customer experience and if we deliver customer delight, our business will grow, right? I already mentioned that we're based in Belgium, Brussels. On our market, you have a couple of very big companies who do that very well, right? Bol.com, Coolblue, Zalando, HelloFresh. All of these companies have understood that convenience experience is what people attracts them to the brand and actually makes their business grow. Now, most people think that like we agree on the concept, but then the execution is something completely different, right? It's not because we are building simple or very good customer experiences and driving them through data in order to grow, to get to business growth, that actually all of that just simply works. It's not a linear process, right? The way at Human 37 we look at things is actually in this circular process. Everything starts with data collection, then we move into insights. And like I said, a lot of companies have data. Most companies have data. Very few companies actually succeed in moving into insights. And almost no company is, or very few, even fewer companies, are actually able to drive that into customer experiences and delight with the result of business growth, right? So the first tip that we have is like, don't simply collect data for the sake of collecting data. There's no magic formula that having the data will give you in order to get to better experiences. You actually need to build a process in order to go from data collection into insights, into customer experience delight, and into business growth. Now, when we say customer experiences and customer delight, again, that can be through better websites, better applications, better campaigns, a better onboarding flow, better notifications, better emails, better marketing automation, even, etc., etc., etc. Right? Again, this is a marketing analytics day, but all of this data, be it behavioral, product, customer, whatever you want to call it, everything's going to be event-based going forward. That's going to be part of your data collection layer. From there, we need to find what are the insights, and then the key is actually to drive that into better customer experiences, to get better delight, to bring better experiences to your end customer, ideally personalized experiences, and then move it into business growth. The second tip is build a democratic data structure. And this is actually more of a exemplatory thingy or mini use case that we brought. Because if I go back one slide, obviously everything starts with the data collection, right? But there's one thing that we have seen over the years that we've been doing this, or over the time that we've been in this field, and that is that not all data is equal. It's not because you have the data that you de facto go to insights, right? There's this important transition happening from data into insights, and there's a lot of ways that you can influence your capability of turning data into insights. And one of these elements is making sure that your data structure, the way you collect it, is actually optimized for data consumption. And the reason why we say that is like we brought an example of an actual client who showed us these reports, these queries. This is from a tool called Mixpanel. And basically what this user seems to be doing is like figuring out some complex insights, right? This looks like a very complex analysis that this person is doing in this platform. Well, I hate to disappoint you. It's actually not true. The screenshot on the left-hand side essentially is a query to try to figure out like how many sign-ins do we have. And on the right-hand side, the query is actually trying to figure out like, okay, which source medium did people actually register through or actually found our website or product. The reason why things are so complex is because the data collection layer, something that we call a tracking plan, isn't optimized, which means that we're going through a problematic data ingestion. We're going through a nightmare analysis, which means that in the end, like if data is complex, it's very hard for people to start analyzing it, which means that people see it as a huge hurdle to get over, which means that at some point they're going to stop doing it, meaning that they're not going to do any analysis anymore, meaning that we're just going to collect data without actually getting to insights because it's too complex to find the insights. There's actually a way around that. Event-based measurements, when you start playing with that, it requires you to think through a couple of things. Again, event-based measurement in the context of a customer data platform, in the context of product analytics, in the context of marketing analytics, such as GA4, right? It requires you to think a bit further and to think about like, okay, how am I gonna analyze this? And how can I actually figure out what the best way is to facilitate the life of the analyst who's actually gonna dig into this data collection, or this data that we've collected and maximize our chances to go to the insights. Now, this is an example of this original data set, and you see that there's like 20 events in there. We call this a cardinality of 20 at the event level. Why? Because there's 20 different or distinct events, 20 unique events. Now, the fact that you have 20 unique events, and if somebody asks you like, okay, but how many times did somebody click a specific button or see a specific impression of this paywall, which is the example, it means that you actually need to know like how many variations are there, because you need to sum all of them, and then you need to like interpret all of that data correctly, right? It means that you need to have a very good understanding of your data collection layer. It means that it could be very complex, and it ends or it results in these very complex queries that you've seen in the previous screenshots, right? Now, there's actually a way around it, and that is like optimizing your tracking plan or optimizing your data collection. And the way we did this for this client is actually like we looked at these 20 events and we said like maybe there's just simply two categories in there, right? We have a click and we have a prompt. A prompt is actually an impression. And instead of just creating 20 distinct events, what we did is we maximized the power of event-based analytics, and we created two events, each with a property, where in that property we would specify further what the unique detail was of that click or that prompt. You might think like, okay, Glenn, but it's essentially the same thing, right? You're just turning 20 events into two events, each with a property with a cardinality of 10. And essentially, you're right. The difference is like for the analyst in the platform, in this case, Mixpanel, analyzing that data, it makes a lot of difference. And I'm going to show you why. The left-hand side was the original query. It required around like 10 clicks at least, I think. Where with this new optimized tracking plan or this optimized data collection layer, we can do the same analysis or get to the same insights using a simplified query on the right-hand side, right? It means that we just need to select the event, and we leverage the power of the platforms and the power of event-based analytics in order to then break everything down and say like, okay, show me this event and break it down over this specific property. And the tool will take care of the heavy lifting for you, okay? So the tip here is that democratize your data plan or think about your data structure as such. Why? Because it will help you get to insights faster and with higher accuracy, because the risk of making errors is just way lower. Tip 3 is always provide minimal viable documentation. This is one of the points that doesn't sound very sexy. Nobody or very few people like to write documentation. I am a huge fan of writing documentation because I know what happens if you don't. But it creates more problems than anything else, right, if you don't have it. At Human 37, we say that a project is only closed when our documentation is written up and is integrated in the documentation of the client. Writing documentation for a lot of people equals the idea of writing a huge novel of 600 pages, right? That's not the objective. We work with a principle called minimal viable documentation, meaning that the objective here is to make sure that people can onboard themselves, ensure continuity when somebody leaves the organization, make sure that the basics are covered, right? We don't need to, every time there's a release or a new feature being added, we don't want to spend 3 hours rewriting the entire documentation. What we just want to do is make sure that we have enough so people can actually look into that, understand what's going on, and then move forward. Why is that so important? Because a couple of things, right? One, you don't want to be a one-bus team. A one-bus team is somebody who has all the knowledge in his or her head. And if that person leaves the company, you're into trouble. You're in deep trouble, right? That's not what you want. What you want is a piece of documentation that allows people to self-onboard, to understand which data is available, so they, again, can make that bridge from data collection into insights. It also makes using data scalable. It maximizes your chances to get into insights. This is a huge thing. This is very important. And for the people who say that or who think that writing documentation sucks, I want you to think about the following. Documentation writing might suck or might not be the sexiest thing, but what really sucks is like trying to figure out after 6 months or 12 months after an implementation how you got there, what the data means, where it comes from, how it's tracked, and actually having to contract somebody to audit your setup all over again. And this could just be solved by figuring out how to write documentation for 1 hour, for 30 minutes, for 90 minutes, whatever you need in order to get to that stage of minimal viable documentation. So please, 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 please document. Otherwise, you're going to get into trouble sooner or later. Tip 4 is make data accessible beyond marketing. And the reason why I took this slide is because, or this idea or this tip is because, again, it's called marketing analytics there, right? Meaning that it's going to be a lot of user stories from a marketing side who are going to determine what the analytics setup looks like, right? It's going to be stuff like, as a marketeer, I would like to know which campaign drove the most visits for my landing page. As a marketeer, I would like to know which campaign resulted in the most signups for my newsletter, right? And you're going to start creating your data sets, your data collection layer based on that. And it's not abnormal because this is research from end of 2022. I think it's Digite and Piano who did this research. But it shows that most of companies or most of the people who were questioned for this specific survey say that within the context of their business, obviously marketing is the owner of analytics. And obviously marketing is a huge stakeholder when it comes to analytics, but analytics can actually serve so much more companies or so much more, departments. And that's especially the case if you're using event-based analytics, right? Because if you think of marketing analytics tool like Universal Analytics, it was very tailored to marketeers. GA4 still is today, even though the product will be evolving. But to give you an example, there is a gateway immediately into BigQuery that allows other people to start consuming that data, right? And if you think about what the use cases they have upfront, it allows you to actually democratize or open up the data that you're collecting through your tools for other use cases that might be interesting or that might be a piece of the puzzle of the question they're trying to answer. So the way we look at it is like try to create one data set or at least a controllable number of data sets that have purposes for a handful of roles and actually hundreds of use cases. Now, the usual story is, as a marketeer, I would like to know which campaign contributed most to conversion so that I can run more of these campaigns. It's the initial user story that we talked about in the context of marketing analytics. But then you could think of, as a product owner, I would like to know which filters are being used the least so I can evaluate if these can be removed from future filter designs. It's also actually a use case that we've solved for one of our clients using GA4, where we filtered or where we measured which filters were being used the most, how many filters were being used the most in the context of a retail client, actually an e-commerce for, not a retail, an e-commerce for baby clothes. And when you go to e-commerce, you usually have on the left-hand side these huge filtering units, right? Because everybody thinks like the more specific we go, the better. And essentially there's some truth in that idea. But for this particular client, we found that users would, on average, only use two filters, a combination of two filters. And also what we found was at that point, using a GA4 dataset, was that the top 10 most popular filters were actually not shown above the fold, right? And so that represents a huge opportunity in order to optimize that product, again, because we're talking about using data to optimize digital experiences, being marketing analytics, being products, being campaigns. And it was a huge opportunity to just simplify and optimize that section on the left-hand side in order to then create an opportunity and to create a couple of hurdles on the conversion window, make sure that people actually had a better conversion rate between two steps, etc. So that was all done using a same data set, right? And again, if you would go further, and we talked about BigQuery in the context of GA4 specifically, as a data scientist, I would like to receive a click stream from a user in order to be able to build a conversion propensity model. So those are all three roles. These are three different user stories, but each of these roles would have like probably 10, 20, 30 user stories they would be interested in. But event-based analytics actually allows you to tap into a lot of these roles, a lot of these user stories using a single data set if you understand what you're tracking from for the beginning. Okay. And tip 5, last but not least, is, and that's the main idea I want everybody to go out of this talk with, is data is worthless if it is not activated. Coming back to the flywheel, right? Everybody in the field, again, it's a talk about marketing analytics, and everybody's focused on the data collection layer and the insight generation, right? I want to urge everybody to think about the last 3 months. What did you do in terms of data collection into insights refinement or insights gathering that actually had an impact in the last 3 months onto your campaigns, your product, etc. And I want to challenge you to challenge yourself to increase the amount of experiences that you put in production based on actual data collected, right? What we say is that data is absolutely worthless unless it's activated and you're actually doing something with it. If you come back to the initial idea, and the initial idea is that we live in an experience economy, better experiences and customer delight drive business growth. And everything starts with data collection, getting into insights, figuring out what is valuable, what is not, and then driving those experiences to the customer. To give you a couple of ideas of what experiences could like, these are all things that, or not all things, but these are examples of experiences that have been amazing, that we've encountered. Some of them we've actually built as a customer. On the first pane, you see better campaigns. Like, better products means a lot of things, right? It's just better interactions that a brand has, better experiences that customers have with their brands. First one is an example from a campaign on car glass that we've worked on years ago in another context in our company, but it was a good example. Where we would personalize digital advertising based on the type of car people were looking into to repair. So it's a very personalized campaign. And at that point, we use the data to get to the insights and say, okay, these are the top brands. Let's do something for the highest percentage of brands, so we can actually personalize a high percentage of ads already, right? I think it was at that time 60 or 70% of the ads that were personalized. But we actually saw a huge increase in engagement, indicating that, well, we were actually driving a better experience to the customer. The middle pane is actually the example of the e-commerce that I showed you, or that I shared you before, is where data can lead to insights that will drive better websites and applications. It could be as simple as optimizing your filtering module, having an insight that says like, hey, maybe we should reduce the number of filters, or the filters that we're working on in our next sprint are actually not that important. Or the top 10 used filters are not available above the fold. What if we run a test, an A/B test, and make the comparison like that? And include a test where we move those filters above the fold and have an idea if that performs better, and then commit it to our sprints, right? And on the right-hand side, you have the obvious example of Zalando, where they use excellent, or they make excellent use of customer data, where they say like, look, there's 1,000 shirts on that website or in that application. And this is actually a screenshot I took, where the application told me like, hey, Glenn, you actually tried this shirt a year ago in this size and you actually returned it. So that saved me from going into that same loop of disappointment again. And so in the end, I bought another shirt, right? But these are excellent examples of how the data collection can actually lead to an activation through a better experience. Okay. So that's it for today. I'm wishing you an excellent rest of the day, rest of the evening, rest of the summit as well, because I think there's a couple of more days coming. And I hope you found this very useful. And the only message I have to you guys is like, go activate your data. If you have questions, you can find me on LinkedIn or in the Heygrowth Slack channel. Have a great evening, guys.